Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is some Christian guy, and today we're going to be continuing with our series on Bible contradictions. And today we are dealing with the 13th objection, namely, let's go straight to the source here. Up you come on. There we go. The objection is as follows. How many of Adonikam's offspring returned from Babylon? And there are the references. Now, for those of you that have been following, number 12 dealt with Adon, and now this one is dealing. It's the same exact story. It is literally the exact same story as before, where there's a discrepancy between two accounts. Basically, the time set is there had been the Jews or Israel had been enslaved by Babylon, carried off, and now we have the period of Persia, and then Cyrus of Persia then decrees that they can go back to their homeland and delegates funds in order to allow the Israelites to rebuild their homeland and rebuild Israel. And then we have in two books, in Ezra and Nehemiah, where they're giving an account of how many of at each point of how many of the children of Israel returned to Israel from Babylon, and there is a discrepancy between the two accounts. So basically they're asking two questions based on the exact same discrepancy, on the exact same thing. So this is a bit silly. They could have just addressed the whole thing, because if you look at the whole thing, the discrepancy does not only occur between in the account of these two particular families. There are others, and we're going to look at that just now. So there is more than one discrepancy in these two accounts. So why they chose to pick on, first of all, why they chose to pick on these two rather than more of them, so make one question for all of them, so that you eventually have like 10 questions based on the same thing. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense why they didn't deal with all of it in just one question, why they separated it into two, and why they didn't seem to notice there were actually more discrepancies than this in the text. So let's go quickly to the text. Just first of all, to remind you, this is the guide text here, okay? This is what the Bible is for. Okay, the most plain, simple text. In doing any theology whatsoever, you always go to the simplest, most straightforward texts and use them as a basis from where you work out the rest of your theology. You don't go to the obscure ones first. You go to the plain, simple statements. And this statement in Timothy is the most plain and straightforward statement on what the Bible is designed for, what it is meant for. Okay, this is its purpose. So this one of the reasons why, just to make a quick side point, a quick segue, one of the reasons why a lot of atheists come up with these ridiculous objections about Bible inerrancy and contradictions and all that stuff is because a lot of Christians make exaggerated claims. They make claims that are actually unbiblical because, I don't know, they get ticked off by some atheist and they go off half-cocked and they make a wild, exaggerated statement. So then when the atheist catches on and then takes him to task and finds that it's not quite what he said, then the atheist has a basis to accuse and say, listen, you're actually wrong. And then you sort of end up with pie in your face. And this is a thing that Christians really need to stop doing, is to the best of your abilities. I mean, obviously it cannot always be avoided, and we have to deal as charitably as possible with everyone as possible. And I mean, everyone makes this area. Atheists do that as well when, for example, when they say there's absolutely no evidence for the existence of Jesus Christ, right? That's absolute garbage. There's plenty of, there is enough evidence to quite irrefutably establish the fact that Jesus Christ, the minimal facts, what we call it's true, it's historical, end of story. So for any atheist to come and say there is no such thing is absolute nonsense. And even someone like Bart Ehrman, who is not a Christian, is more like an agnostic, and he's one of the most widely respected historians out there, he takes these people that say that Jesus didn't exist, he really takes them to task. It's a total fabrication, total exaggeration, and stuff like that. So everyone does that, and then it will lead obviously to a lot of false and silly accusations and stuff like that, right? So most of this stuff comes out from the fact that when Christians talk about biblical inerrancy and all that kind of stuff, they tend to exaggerate and not deal responsibly with what it is, what the Bible is there for, right? So here's the most simple statement that you can find on Scripture is God-breathed, so it's not directly dictated, it's inspired, and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. That's plain and simple. That's what it is for. At no point is it going to tell you, because it is inspired and not directly dictated, at no point does it say does the Bible in its own right claim that there will not be disparities between the accounts of individuals, because when individual people give accounts of something that they witnessed, for example, necessarily because of the different perspectives, there's going to be differences or disparities in the account. It's just, that's how human beings are. Okay, so when we say it is infallible as a document for the purposes that Timothy here states, and no more and no less. That's as simple as that. Okay, so we need to temper our statements, otherwise we become accused. And here's the biggest problem, right? A lot of Christians seem too stupid to realize that if you make exaggerated claims, right, the fact that an atheist is going to find out and you're going to be sitting with egg on your face is actually the least of your worries. The biggest concern is that someone in your own group, so someone who is a Christian, right? Let's say you are a priest or a pastor, whatever the case might be, right? And you make an exaggerated claim. If one of your church members finds out that that claim is actually false, right? They're going to lose, what they're going to realize is, wow, I've been lied to, right? And most people will not say, oh, he was merely mistaken, maybe it's not like that. The average person will not temper their view. They will actually be, from being disgruntled, they will actually abandon the view altogether and become hyper skeptical then, and eventually land up as an atheist, because some priest went and made some idiotic claim. So the member of the congregation found out it wasn't true, and is like, well, if that's not true, then what else is not true? And then it just spirals out of control. So when you actually make exaggerated claims yourself as a Christian, you are actually becoming a stumbling block for other Christians when it comes to their faith. So you are then responsible for then another, and it's just, again, as a Christian, we are not meant to bear a false witness. An exaggerated claim is a false witness. Okay, we need to understand that an exaggerated claim is a false witness, and you are therefore guilty of sin, right? Because there are dire consequences when you do not tell something exactly how it is to the best of your knowledge, right? We are fallible. To the best of your knowledge, no more and no less. All right, and then, of course, this is why we have this problem, right? And atheists come up with these nonsensical accusations. So let's go to the text. Forgive me for the digression. So there's the text again. That's where we're going. Ezra 13 and Nehemiah 7. Let's go to the original source in Ezra. So in Ezra 2:13, we clearly here say that of the people returning in Adonikam's family, you've got 666, or for you conspiracy people there, or mark of the beast, right? Probably going to hear something about that. And then in Nehemiah, you have then a contradiction which says 667 instead of 666. Okay, now let's establish what we usually establish, right? We have here there's a contradiction in the counts. One is one digit more than the other. So do we have a contradiction or a discrepancy, rather? The answer is yes. But do we necessarily have a contradiction? right? Do we necessarily have a contradiction? First of all, if we grant that this is a contradiction, does it in any way affect the usefulness of the Bible under the terms stated in Timothy? The answer is absolutely not. There is no doctrine based on how many people came from, of this guy's family came from Babylon, let alone a discrepancy of one, is not going to overthrow Christian doctrine. It's idiotic to think so. All right? So this does not pose a threat to Christian faith at all. Okay? Now, is it necessarily a contradiction or merely a sort of a discrepancy? Because here's the thing. What most people don't understand is that between the period of Ezra and Nehemiah is a period of about 15 years. Okay? It's a period of roughly 15 years. Now, 15 years is a long time. Now, another thing we need to understand is you have basically a population that has been enslaved for quite a while, right? Been enslaved, now returning to Israel, and they're trying to take a census of who is who in the zoo so that Israel can try and establish themselves. As a matter of course, it's going to take a while for people to sort out who is who and so on and so forth. We're not given the context of what happened to these people in every minute detail back in Babylon. Children might have been adopted, whatever the case might be. So in the process of sorting out who is who in the zoo, over a period of 15 or more years, it might eventually transpire, as they're doing their investigations, that some sort of error was made in, or maybe these people did not actually belong to that family, they actually belong to that family. And so what you will have is you'll have your first edition of the census, and then over time, as they sort things out, you will have a second or a third or a fourth edition that is an updated version. So it's not that it's a contradiction. You basically have different editions. You wouldn't say that the first edition of a book and then a second edition of a book that gives more updated information or a more correct, that they're contradicting each other and that this is some sort of strange conspiracy and now we must throw the baby out with the bathwater. You would never say that. Okay? First of all, that's the simple case. Also, here's another thing, right? Christians, atheists often like to accuse Christians and say that the Bible is some contrived piece of propaganda, right? One of the ways we know that that is a false, idiotic accusation is because if the Bible was a contrived piece of propaganda, these kinds of mistakes would not have been made. Because as the person is compiling the text, this is a simple mistake that's what someone would have caught, right? One of the and even people who work in law enforcement, one of the first things they know if they get a group of people who robbed a bank or whatever the case might be, they separate them into different interrogation rooms and interrogate them on a particular event or occurrence. They know, law enforcement agents know, that if all of their stories line up absolutely 100% perfectly, they know immediately that the story is not true and that it's contrived. Right? That is contrived. They expect to be discrepancies. It's just one of those ways. And the same thing applies for historical documentation. We know if you are a historian, you go and speak to a historian, what we look for, if you are a historian, is independent sources. And one of the ways you know that sources are independent eyewitness testimonies of various and not the one. So for example, let's say you've got 10 pieces or 10 books describing a particular event. How do you know that these are 10 independent sources, or whether they're all actually the same story based on each other? So you've got one story in 10 books, or 10 different stories in 10 books, or 10 different testimonies of the same events. You will know because they will contain differences, right? That's how you tell that they're independent testimonies, because independent sources, independent testimonies will necessarily contain slight variations in their testimony, and that is how you know that a particular source is an independent source, that it's not two people getting together in some sort of conspiracy and saying we're going to get our story straight in order to propagate our falsehood or whatever the case might be, right? So the fact that there is an error establishes the fact that the Bible, that these are independent sources, right? Now, let's go further into this particular issue, right? If we go and read the entire, right, read it in context, which a lot of a lot of atheists don't do, right? In Ezra, now these are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles, etc., etc., returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to their own town in company, so on and so forth. And here they take the census, right? So this is Ezra. Now Ezra is the one taking the first edition of the census. He's the first one, and they're listing and everything like that and so on, and these are the number of the people. Now, as we go along, you will find that not all of them have numbers attached, right? Not all of them have values attached. So some of them do, some of them don't. So it's incomplete because there might have been some kind of uncertainty, right? Now, if you go to the one in Nehemiah, listen what he says. The city was large and spacious. So this is clearly later. But there were few people in the houses, had not yet been built. So my God put in my heart to assemble the nobles, officials, and the common people for registration by their families. So he's trying to get something sorted. Now, here's what he says. I found the genealogical record, right? I found. So here Nehemiah is literally telling you that he's using an extra biblical source that might have had changes or revisions over time. So he's merely reporting what he had. That's it. It's no great mystery. Right? He's merely saying, I found this book, this is what I had, and I'm just telling you, it's merely reporting what was the case. Because you get that in the Bible. Sometimes it's asserting X, Y, and Z to be true, or whatever the case might be, but sometimes the Bible, it's merely reporting X, Y, or Z was the case at a particular time. Right? And if that account contradicts another account, is because obviously the situation between the two different times, separated by however many years, the situation has changed. It's merely reporting. That's all it's doing, right? So it's not necessarily that this is some horrible contradiction or whatever the case might be. There are any number of reasons for why these two accounts may be different, and the most reasonable one is that so you had Ezra that's gathering the people to try and do a genealogy, and now you have Nehemiah as well. It stands to reason that in a period of 15 years that this was not the first time it happened, and that there might have been some kind of revisions. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. The scripture, it doesn't tell us. It's merely reporting and saying this happened to be the case, and it's not exhaustive. Why? Because it doesn't matter. There's no doctrine hanging on these numbers, right? It's not. It's a secondary fact. It's a secondary issue. It's not a problem. Okay? And he tells you quite up. He's straight up. I found the record, and you have here. So we can do this literally a parallel of Farash 2172, 372. So here Ara 775, Ara 652. We have a discrepancy. So they didn't even get all of them, right? So Patha Moab 2818, 2812. So there are slight discrepancies in their accounts, right? And if you go all the way along, right to the bottom, it says the whole company numbered 42,360. Let's go all the way to the bottom, see what it eventually concludes. The whole company numbered 42,360. So when they do the final count, besides there was slaves and right? When they give the overall count, they agree a number. They agree. 42,360, 42,360, 42,360. So the overall number of the amount of people there were is the same. So if you see that the overall count, the overall head count is the same number of people, it stands to reason that the most logical explanation is that what happened here is there was some kind of revision. There might have been some sort of confusion. They were slaves, for heaven's sake, right? Things can, it's just, it's ridiculous. This is not a big issue, right, at all. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Is this a contradiction? No, it's not a contradiction. Is there a discrepancy? Yes. Are there reasonable reasons for why this discrepancy should be there? Absolutely. I mean, if these people just would look at the damn thing, and it's ridiculous. So not a contradiction. Yes, there's a discrepancy. They're merely reporting on something. There might have been updates, there might have been revisions. The overall numbers agree. So it's ridiculous. This is not conspiracy. This doesn't undermine Christianity in any way or shape or form. Simple as that. So done and dusted, debunked. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and I'll see you next time. God bless. I hope that helps. Ciao.